In today's video, we're going to be having a look at the Hong Kong situation in a little bit more depth after the news we've heard from the US about them declaring it not an autonomous state anymore. Hello and welcome to another acysecurities market update. My name is Alistair Schultz and I'm going to be your host for today's trading journey. To kick things off, we are just going to have a quick look at what's going on with COVID-19. Right now, the US has actually surpassed 100,000 infections, with the number being 100,396. So they are now the clear outlier for the largest cases of deaths in the US and the largest number of infections. Moving on from that, we're going to have to see how it transpires, especially since the lockdowns have been so controversial in the US, and how they might look in the next coming weeks. Now, moving on from that, we've heard some stuff coming out of the US from and about Hong Kong in the recent days. Most of it has come from Mike Pompeo, and he has basically said that no person can reasonably assert today that Hong Kong maintains a high degree of autonomy. Now, this is obviously a problem because it means that they're not likely to have Hong Kong being a part of these special trade statuses, and it is likely going to impact both the people in Hong Kong themselves in terms of business and the economy, but also the trade that goes through both Hong Kong and China, and therefore to the US as well. So it is a bit of an interesting point to look at, and there has been talk about this actually occurring. The next steps are really to see what the sanctions might be at the end, if there are going to be tariffs and a variety of other factors down the line. But I'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, the other thing to look at from the US has been that they have made a vote, 413-1, to put sanctions on Chinese officials for human rights abuses against Muslim minorities in China. So at this point in time, there's approximately about 1 million Muslim Chinese living in China, and they have been living under substandard conditions, or at least that's what the facts or the reports basically indicate. Now, the US has had almost a unanimous decision to place sanctions, and what those sanctions might look like could be through visa disregards or abilities for people being able to travel in and out. There could also be more tariffs occurring. We're not quite sure, and we're not going to really find out at least until the end of the week, perhaps sometime next week when we get a little bit more clarification. So right now, the two things to really note about the Hong Kong situation is about the US vote that's gone on here, and of course about the autonomy of Hong Kong. Now, having a look at what sanctions the US has already placed, these are the sanctions that are currently around the globe. And if they do decide to place sanctions on China based off this new vote, which has still not been signed by President Trump, but could very well be in the coming days, it might end up looking a little bit like this instead. So then we will have a number of other China being incorporated into the other countries that are already being placed with sanctions that include the likes of Iran and a few others along the way. Now, considering what's really going on around the globe, what was happening before COVID-19, we did have some tensions occurring in the South China Sea. Those disputes are still ongoing. The only difference is that with COVID-19, everyone's kind of forgotten about it a little bit. But the fact remains that there is still a number of countries trying to assert their dominance in this area. That includes China, Vietnam, Brunei, Kuala Lumpur, and Malaysia. And we've got some parts of the Philippines as well, all having a little bit of dispute here as to who is really got right of passage or who owns parts of these waters. Now, China has warned against the US in the last couple of weeks about provoking the idea of a new Cold War. They do feel that America has been pushing this situation, which is almost forcing their hand. But we've also seen the US side and the Chinese side preparing for military sort of warfare in certain states. President Xi has warned about strengthening war preparations, and we've also seen the US and China's Navy starting to be redeployed into the South China Sea. So we've got a number of factors that really are raising these tensions between China and America, and a number of other countries are sort of sitting in the middle, not sure where to go. Naturally, this is putting a lot of strain on Hong Kong nationals, and it is also putting a lot of strain on markets around the world as to what is going on, specifically on your Asian indexes. So what's really next for Hong Kong? Well, now that we've got a declaration that says that Hong Kong no longer has any autonomy, and that was observed before 1997, that it was always autonomy under the British rule, we're now equating that to be about $38 billion in trade from between US and Hong Kong if that special trade status is revoked. Now, whilst $38 billion in the scheme of things isn't a massive amount of money when we've been hearing about stimulus packages in the $1 trillion marks, for the local economy of Hong Kong, who are already suffering from some levels of recession based due to the riots, this is a very big number. They obviously have a small economy. Even though they do make some big numbers up, that $38 billion is really going to hit home pretty hard. So it is going to be interesting to see what happens there. The next part of this is also looking at some of the businesses that operate that might be US listed or from other countries around the world. At this point in time, there's approximately 290 US businesses that operate their headquarters out of Hong Kong. And then they have some 434 regional offices also operating out of there. So if they do find that this is the conditions that they might have to be working under or conducting business under get too difficult, or the situation really does boil over a little bit, then we might start to find that a number of these US-based companies might start to take flight, looking to set up elsewhere, such as Singapore. But if the US guys are starting to think about it, then we might see some of the European entities or the Australian entities and a variety of others, which is obviously not going to be a good situation for Hong Kong itself. Now, once upon a time, Hong Kong was a very big trading route that would allow trade flow to China. Now, these days, it's not so much. It used to be a very big number. Now it's down to about 12% of all trade sort of rolls through there. They're still big numbers when you think about it, but regardless of that factor, it's not something that's so much of a big point or interest for China. They have plenty of other ways of bringing in that income. So I don't anticipate seeing it being a massive issue, bar seeing the idea of potentially more sanctions, more tariffs, and obviously furthering the US-China tensions that are really going to occur. And that's the way that I sort of see it at this point in time. And until we get more data, we find out a little bit more about what perhaps the national security laws really have in them, and of course, what the US is planning to do about changing the status of autonomy, and if they are going to revoke or reduce the amount of capabilities or things that might improve the situation in Hong Kong through the special trade status, it's going to be very hard to sort of say what the future of Hong Kong is as a financial hub and of course as a business hub. Now, moving on from that, I do have a couple of things for the news for you to have a look at for the day ahead. We have US prelim GDP occurring. We also have US unemployment claims and US crude, plus FOMC member Williams will be speaking at some stage at about 2 a.m. It will be important to have a look at the unemployment claims to see if that trend is continuing to go down in terms of smaller numbers for claims. And of course, with futures contracts coming up for WTI in June, it will be important to have a look, being that this is the last week of May, and it will be an interesting point to see if we are still hitting tank tops. Now, moving on from that, if you do have any questions about some of the stuff I've covered today or perhaps in some of my other videos, please feel free to send me an email at talktoal@acy.com. And of course, if you want to check out any more of our content, feel free to like and subscribe to this page. In addition to that, feel free to also check me out on AusBiz TV, coming up to you every Tuesday at 9:40 a.m. on The Drop. Have a great trading day ahead.